Hello, welcome to Crimson Noir.
The village of Stonycroft had always taken pride in its traditions. Nestled among rolling green hills and bordered by ancient hedgerows, it was the sort of place where generations remained rooted to the same soil. Families knew one another's histories. Births, marriages, and deaths were community affairs discussed over tea and remembered for decades, which was why the funeral of Margaret Ashcombe drew such a crowd. Margaret had been one of the village's oldest residents, a widow who had spent nearly 60 years in Stonycroft. Few people could remember a time when she had not been present at church socials, harvest festivals, and charity events. Her passing, though not unexpected, left a noticeable absence. The funeral took place on a grey autumn afternoon. Villagers gathered beneath overcast skies as the church bells rang solemnly across the valley. Friends and neighbours filled the pews, while others stood outside among the weathered gravestones. Among those attending was Miss Marple, who happened to be visiting her cousin, Eleanor Finch. Miss Marple had known Margaret slightly over the years and felt it appropriate to pay her respects. The service proceeded quietly. Prayers were read, memories were shared. The congregation reflected upon a long life well lived. Afterward, many attendees lingered in the churchyard. As often happened in village life, sorrow gradually gave way to conversation. People exchanged stories, old acquaintances, renewed connections. Someone suggested taking a group photograph for Margaret's family. The idea seemed harmless enough. Several villagers gathered near the church gates while a local photographer arranged everyone into position. The picture was taken. The moment passed, or so everyone believed. 3 days later, the photograph arrived from the developer. Copies were distributed among family members and several villagers. At first glance, the image appeared entirely ordinary. Then someone noticed the woman. She stood near the back of the group, tall, dark-haired, wearing a black coat and gloves. No one recognized her. That in itself was unusual. Stonycroft was not a large village. Strangers were rarely overlooked. Yet what truly unsettled people was that nobody remembered seeing her at the funeral. Not a single person. The woman appeared clearly in the photograph, yet no witness recalled speaking to her. No one recalled standing beside her. No one even recalled seeing her enter or leave the churchyard. Naturally, gossip spread with astonishing speed. By the weekend, the mysterious woman had become the village's favorite topic. Some suggested she was a distant relative. Others believed she had attended the wrong funeral. A few embraced more imaginative explanations involving ghosts and supernatural visitations. Miss Marple listened politely to every theory. She accepted none of them. Photographs occasionally captured peculiar things, but people were generally more mysterious than spirits. The matter might have remained a harmless curiosity had it not been for what happened next. On Monday morning, Harold Briggs failed to appear at work. The omission immediately attracted concern. Harold owned the village hardware shop and was known for punctuality bordering on obsession. When repeated attempts to contact him failed, neighbors investigated. Shortly before noon, he was found dead inside his cottage. The discovery shocked Stonycroft. Harold Briggs had been healthy, energetic, and only 58 years old. No obvious explanation existed. The village doctor expressed uncertainty. The police were notified. Questions began. As news spread, attention soon shifted toward the funeral photograph. Someone examining the image noticed that Harold Briggs stood only a few feet from the unidentified woman. The observation might have meant nothing, yet it felt unsettling, especially after Harold's sudden death. Within hours, rumors flourished. The mysterious woman became linked to the tragedy. Some insisted she must have known Harold. Others claimed she had been watching him during the funeral. Each retelling grew slightly more dramatic. Inspector David Mercer arrived from the county office the following day. Practical and methodical, He had little patience for village speculation. His interest focused upon facts. Who was the woman? Why did no one remember seeing her? And was her appearance connected in any way to Harold Briggs's death? The questions seemed straightforward. The answers proved elusive. That evening, while reviewing a copy of the photograph at Eleanor Finch's cottage, Miss Marple studied the unfamiliar figure carefully. Something about the woman's expression intrigued her. She appeared neither sad nor detached. Instead, she seemed to be observing, watching, as though her attention was fixed upon someone beyond the camera's frame. Miss Marple continued examining the image for several moments. Then, she noticed something else, a detail so small that most people would never have considered it important. The woman was not looking at the funeral procession. She was looking directly at Harold Briggs, and for reasons Miss Marple could not yet explain, that troubled her far more than the stranger's presence itself. The discovery that the unidentified woman appeared to be looking directly at Harold Briggs quickly became the subject of intense discussion throughout Stoneycroft. Once the observation spread, villagers examined the photograph repeatedly. Some became convinced the woman's gaze proved a connection. Others argued it was merely a trick of perspective. The debate accomplished little, except increasing the sense of unease that had settled over the village. Inspector David Mercer preferred evidence to speculation. His investigation into Harold Briggs's death proceeded methodically. The village doctor could not immediately determine the cause of death. There were no signs of violence, no indication of forced entry, and no obvious reason why a healthy man should suddenly collapse inside his own cottage. The uncertainty only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, police began identifying everyone present at Margaret Ashcombe's funeral. The process seemed straightforward. Nearly everyone in the photograph was known. Names were recorded, backgrounds confirmed, yet the woman in black remained unidentified. No villager claimed acquaintance with her. No relatives of Margaret Ashcombe recognized her. No visitor to the church remembered speaking with her. It was as though she had appeared briefly and then vanished without leaving a trace. That afternoon, Miss Marple accompanied her cousin Eleanor Finch to the village tea-room. Naturally, conversation revolved around little else. Missy Cooper, who owned the establishment, possessed strong opinions on the matter. "She's connected somehow," she declared confidently. "People don't appear out of nowhere." "No," Miss Marple agreed pleasantly. "They generally arrive from somewhere." Mrs. Cooper looked slightly disappointed by the response. She had clearly hoped for greater enthusiasm. Nearby customers continued discussing the stranger. One theory suggested she was a journalist. Another proposed she was conducting genealogical research. A third involved secret inheritances and hidden relatives. Miss Marple listened carefully. Occasionally, even the wildest gossip contained a useful detail. Late that afternoon, Inspector Mercer received a small breakthrough. A photographer's assistant remembered seeing the woman shortly before the funeral service began. The recollection was limited but useful. According to the assistant, she arrived alone and carried a small leather handbag. More importantly, she appeared familiar with the church grounds. She did not behave like a visitor. She moved with confidence, as though she had been there before. The information interested Miss Marple considerably. People unfamiliar with a place often revealed uncertainty through small behaviors. The woman apparently displayed none. That suggested a connection to Stoneycroft, even if nobody recognized her. The following morning brought another unexpected development. While sorting Harold Briggs's personal papers, investigators discovered a sealed envelope hidden inside a desk drawer. The contents proved intriguing. Inside was an old photograph taken nearly 20 years earlier. It showed a group of villagers standing outside the same church. Among them was a younger Harold Briggs. Also visible were several residents who had since moved away or died. At first glance, the image appeared unremarkable. Then Inspector Mercer noticed something. A young woman stood near the edge of the group, dark-haired, tall, wearing a coat remarkably similar to the one seen in the recent funeral photograph. The resemblance was striking, yet the image was too old to permit certainty. The discovery, nevertheless, transformed the investigation. If the woman appeared in a photograph taken 20 years earlier, then she almost certainly possessed a historical connection to the village. The question became why nobody remembered her. That evening, Miss Marple spent time studying both photographs side by side. Something about them felt important, not merely the woman's presence, the positioning. In both images, she stood slightly apart from everyone else, close enough to belong, far enough to remain detached. The behavior struck Miss Marple as oddly deliberate. People naturally gathered among friends and family. Standing alone often indicated caution or observation. The next day, another surprise emerged. A retired schoolteacher named Agnes Morton contacted the police. After examining the funeral photograph, she believed she recognized the mysterious woman. The news spread rapidly. Inspector Mercer arranged an interview immediately. When Agnes arrived, she appeared uncertain. "I may be mistaken," she admitted, "but she reminds me of someone." "Who?" Mercer asked. The elderly woman hesitated. Then she spoke a name that none of the investigators expected. "Claire Whitfield." The room fell silent. "Who's Claire Whitfield?" the inspector asked. Agnes looked genuinely surprised. "You've never heard of her?" "No." The school teacher frowned. "That's odd. Why?" "Because 20 years ago half the village was talking about her." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. Something in Agnes Morton's voice suggested that Claire Whitfield's story had once been important, and if that was true, it might finally explain why a stranger had appeared in a funeral photograph only days before Harold Briggs died. The mystery, she suspected, had just taken its first truly significant turn. Agnes Morton's revelation immediately transformed the investigation. For the first time, the mysterious woman in the funeral photograph had a possible identity: Claire Whitfield. The name meant little to Inspector Mercer, yet among a handful of older villagers it stirred distant memories. The following morning, Agnes returned to provide a fuller account. Miss Marple attended the interview alongside Inspector Mercer. The elderly schoolteacher spoke slowly, occasionally pausing to recall events. From 2 decades earlier, Claire Whitfield, she explained, had arrived in Stonycroft when she was in her early 20s. She worked briefly at a local accounting office and rented a cottage near the village green. By all accounts, she had been intelligent, reserved, and well-liked. Yet her stay in Stonycroft lasted less than a year. Then she disappeared. "Disappeared," Mercer repeated. Agnes nodded. "One day she was simply gone. No explanation, none that I ever heard." The school teacher frowned thoughtfully. "There was gossip, of course." "What sort of gossip?" Agnes hesitated. "Some believed she'd become involved in a disagreement." "With whom?" "I never knew." The answer was frustrating. Still, it provided the first real thread connecting the mysterious woman to the village. After the interview, Mercer ordered a search of old records. The effort quickly uncovered confirmation that Claire Whitfield had indeed lived in Stonycroft 20 years earlier. However, very little documentation remained. Employment files were incomplete. Rental agreements had been discarded. The trail seemed strangely thin. Miss Marple found that interesting. Most people left traces behind. The near absence of records suggested either remarkable coincidence or deliberate removal. That afternoon, another witness came forward. George Larkin, a retired postman, remembered Claire Whitfield surprisingly well. According to him, she received frequent letters during her time in the village. Most originated from London. One sender appeared repeatedly, a man named Richard Hales. The name meant nothing to investigators. Yet George recalled something else. Toward the end of Claire's stay, the letters stopped abruptly. Shortly afterward, she vanished. The information deepened the mystery. Who was Richard Hales, and why had his correspondence ceased so suddenly? Meanwhile, Inspector Mercer continued examining Harold Briggs's background. At first glance, nothing appeared suspicious. He had operated the hardware shop for decades. His finances were stable, his reputation was excellent. Yet, as investigators dug deeper, small inconsistencies emerged. Several records connected Harold to village committee activities 20 years earlier, coincidentally the same period during which Claire Whitfield lived in Stonycroft. The overlap attracted attention. That evening, Miss Marple reviewed old newspaper archives in the village library. Most editions contained mundane reports about feats, council meetings, and local events. Then she found something curious. A brief article mentioned an inquiry into accounting irregularities involving a community development fund. The report offered few details. No names appeared, yet the timing matched Claire Whitfield's residence in the village exactly. Miss Marple read the article twice, then a third time. The piece ended with an unusual sentence. The matter has now been resolved to the satisfaction of all parties involved. The wording struck her as peculiar. People rarely describe genuine resolutions in such careful language. The next morning brought an even more startling development. Police finally obtained access to records from the accounting office where Claire Whitfield had worked. Among surviving documents was a personnel file. Inside lay a letter of resignation. The letter was brief, polite, entirely ordinary, except for one thing. The signature did not match samples of Claire Whitfield's handwriting found elsewhere. The difference was unmistakable. Someone had signed the letter for her. Inspector Mercer stared at the document in disbelief. If she didn't write this, then perhaps she never resigned, Miss Marple suggested quietly. The implication hung heavily in the room. For 20 years, everyone had assumed Claire Whitfield left voluntarily. Now that assumption appears doubtful. Later that afternoon, a search of archived police records uncovered another forgotten detail. Several weeks before her disappearance, Claire Whitfield had reported feeling followed. The complaint generated little interest at the time. No suspect was identified. No further action occurred. The report was eventually forgotten, until now, as evening settled over Stonycroft. Miss Marple sat in Eleanor Finch's garden reflecting upon the growing puzzle. A young woman arrived in the village. She became connected to accounting irregularities. She reported being followed. Then she vanished. 20 years later, a woman who looked remarkably like her appeared in a funeral photograph. Days afterward, Harold Briggs died unexpectedly. The sequence seemed impossible to dismiss. And yet, Miss Marple sensed that Harold Briggs was not the true center of the mystery. Someone else occupied that position, someone whose connection to Claire Whitfield remained hidden. The question was whether they were concealing an old scandal or a much older crime. The possibility that Claire Whitfield had not left Stonycroft voluntarily cast the entire investigation in a new light. What had once appeared to be a curious coincidence now suggested something far more troubling. Inspector Mercer expanded his inquiries immediately. If Claire's resignation letter had been forged, then someone had wanted people to believe she left willingly. The obvious question was why. Meanwhile, Harold Briggs's sudden death remained unexplained. Preliminary medical findings offered no clear answers. There were no visible injuries, no signs of forced entry, and nothing to indicate an obvious cause. The uncertainty frustrated investigators. It also fueled village speculation. Before long, many residents became convinced that Harold's death and Claire Whitfield's disappearance were connected. The challenge was proving it. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village library once again. She spent several hours examining newspapers from the year Claire vanished. Most reports appeared mundane. Then she discovered something interesting. A brief article mentioned a charity development project that had generated considerable local excitement. Several respected villagers served on the committee overseeing its finances. One name immediately caught her attention: Harold Briggs. Another followed moments later: Edward Carrington. The current chairman of the parish council, Miss Marple, made careful notes. The same project appeared connected to the accounting. Irregularities mentioned in earlier reports that could not be ignored. Later that day, Inspector Mercer interviewed Edward Carrington. The parish chairman welcomed him politely. A well-respected figure in Stonycroft, Carrington enjoyed a reputation for honesty and community service. When asked about Claire Whitfield, however, he seemed uncomfortable, not frightened, not defensive, simply uncomfortable. The distinction mattered. "I remember her," he admitted. "Did you know her well?" "No." The answer came rather quickly. "Yet you worked on the same development project." Carrington nodded reluctantly. "Briefly." "What happened?" The older man sighed. "Nothing happened." His tone suggested otherwise. Although he provided no useful information, Mercer left convinced that Carrington knew more than he was saying. That evening, another unexpected witness came forward. A woman named Ruth Palmer contacted police after hearing discussion of Claire Whitfield on the radio. Ruth had once shared a boarding house with Claire. Her recollections proved remarkably detailed. According to Ruth, Claire became increasingly anxious during her final weeks in Stonycroft. She frequently checked windows before bedtime. She avoided walking alone. On one occasion, she even confided a fear. "She told me she'd found something she wasn't supposed to find," Ruth recalled. The statement immediately captured everyone's attention. "What sort of thing?" Mercer asked. "She wouldn't say." Ruth shook her head. But she seemed genuinely frightened. The revelation strengthened suspicions that Claire had uncovered wrongdoing connected to the development project. More importantly, it suggested her disappearance was unlikely to have been voluntary. The following morning brought another breakthrough. Investigators examining old council archives discovered several missing files relating to the Charity Development Fund. Entire sections had vanished: financial records, meeting minutes, correspondence. Someone had removed them years earlier. The discovery alarmed Inspector Mercer. Missing records often indicated deliberate concealment, and concealment usually existed for a reason. Miss Marple found herself thinking about human nature. People frequently believed crimes were hidden through cleverness. More often, they were hidden through silence. One person remained silent because they were afraid, another because they were embarrassed, a third because they feared consequences. Years passed. Memories faded. Truth became buried, not because anyone actively protected it, but because nobody wished to disturb it. Yet occasionally, a person arrived who insisted upon asking questions. Claire Whitfield appeared to have been one of those people. That afternoon, Mercer received news that dramatically altered the investigation. Police had finally identified the woman in the funeral photograph. Not Claire Whitfield, but someone closely related. The woman was named Anna Whitfield, Claire's daughter. The revelation stunned everyone. Anna Whitfield was 39 years old and worked as an investigative journalist in London. For months, she had apparently been researching her mother's disappearance. More remarkably, she had recently visited Stonycroft under an assumed name. The mystery woman had not appeared by accident. She had come looking for answers. The discovery explained much. It also created new questions. Why had Anna chosen to remain anonymous? What had she learned? And perhaps most importantly, why had Harold Briggs died only days after she appeared? As evening approached, Inspector Mercer arranged to contact Anna Whitfield. Yet before he could do so, another disturbing development occurred. A message arrived at the police station. It had been delivered by hand. No signature, no return address. Only a single sentence written across the page. Ask Anna Whitfield what Harold Briggs told her before he died. For the second time in a week, silence filled the investigation room. Someone knew Anna had spoken to Harold. Someone knew information the police did not. And someone clearly wanted that conversation uncovered. Miss Marple suspected it might finally lead them toward the truth. The anonymous message changed the course of the investigation. Until that moment, Anna Whitfield had been viewed primarily as a woman searching for answers about her mother's disappearance. Now, it appeared, she possessed information directly connected to Harold Briggs's death. Inspector Mercer succeeded in contacting her the following morning. To his surprise, she agreed to meet immediately. Anna arrived in Stonycroft that afternoon. She was tall, dark-haired, and unmistakably the woman from the funeral photograph. Several villagers recognized her at once. The resemblance to Claire Whitfield was remarkable. It explained why Agnes Morton had believed she was looking at the same person. Though separated by 20 years, mother and daughter shared many features. Miss Marple observed Anna carefully during the meeting. She seemed intelligent, cautious, and exhausted. The expression belonged to someone who had spent a long time pursuing difficult answers. Inspector Mercer wasted little time. "You attended Margaret Ashcombe's funeral under a false name?" Anna nodded. "Yes. Why?" "Because I didn't want people knowing who I was." The answer sounded reasonable. "What were you hoping to find?" Anna hesitated briefly. "The truth about my mother." The room fell silent. Mercer then showed her the anonymous note. Her reaction was immediate. Shock, then concern. "You spoke with Harold Briggs?" the inspector asked. "Yes." The admission electrified the investigation. Anna explained that she had spent several months researching her mother's disappearance. Eventually, her inquiries led her to Stonycroft. Most residents refused to discuss Claire Whitfield. Harold Briggs proved the exception. "He agreed to meet me privately," she said. "When? The evening after the funeral." That timing immediately attracted attention. Harold died the following morning. "What did he tell you?" Anna took a deep breath. "He said my mother never left the village." The statement stunned everyone present. For years, Claire Whitfield had been presumed to have departed voluntarily. Harold apparently believed otherwise. "Did he explain?" Mercer asked. Anna nodded slowly. "He told me several people knew what happened." "Who?" "He didn't say." The answer disappointed investigators. Yet, Anna had more to reveal. According to her account, Harold appeared frightened throughout the conversation. Several times he looked over his shoulder. He repeatedly lowered his voice whenever other people approached. Most tellingly, he made a promise. He said he would give me proof. The room became very still. What sort of proof? He wouldn't explain. Anna looked down briefly. He asked me to return the following day, but he died before that meeting. Yes, the significance was impossible to ignore. Harold Briggs had apparently decided to reveal something important. Within hours he was dead. That evening, Miss Marple reviewed the information carefully. A pattern was beginning to emerge. Claire Whitfield discovered something. Years later, Anna began asking questions. Harold Briggs agreed to help. Then he died unexpectedly. The sequence felt alarmingly familiar. The following morning brought another breakthrough. Investigators searching Harold's shop uncovered a concealed compartment behind an old storage cabinet. Inside were several documents wrapped in cloth. Most appeared to be routine financial records. One item stood out immediately: a photograph. The image had been taken 20 years earlier. It showed members of the Charity Development Committee standing outside the village hall. Harold Briggs appeared near the center. Edward Carrington stood beside him. Several other familiar faces were visible, so was Claire Whitfield. Unlike previous photographs, however, this one captured something unusual. Claire was arguing with someone. The confrontation appeared intense. Although the image lacked sound, her expression conveyed unmistakable anger. The person facing her was partially obscured, yet enough remained visible for identification. Edward Carrington. Inspector Mercer stared at the photograph. For weeks, Carrington had occupied the edges of the investigation. Now he appeared much closer to the center. Further examination of Harold's hidden documents produced another surprise. Several handwritten notes described irregularities within the development fund. Names appeared repeatedly. Transactions were questioned, Missing amounts were highlighted, and once again, Edward Carrington's name surfaced throughout the records. The discovery dramatically increased suspicion. Yet, Miss Marple remained cautious. Financial misconduct explained motives for concealment. It did not automatically explain disappearance or murder. Human behavior remained more important than paperwork. Later that afternoon, another piece of the puzzle arrived unexpectedly. A retired groundskeeper named Samuel Hurst came forward. After hearing reports about Anna Whitfield, he claimed to remember Claire's final day in the village. "I saw her near the old quarry," he said. "When?" "The evening before she vanished." Mercer leaned forward. "Was she alone?" The old man hesitated. For several seconds he seemed uncertain, then he answered quietly, "No." "Who was with her?" Samuel Hurst looked directly at the inspector. "Edward Carrington." The room fell silent. For the first time since the investigation began, a direct connection linked Edward Carrington to Claire Whitfield's disappearance. Whether that connection proved innocent or sinister remained unclear, but Miss Marple could not ignore the growing pattern. Too many roads were beginning to lead toward the same person, and she suspected the journey was far from over. Samuel Hurst's statement placed Edward Carrington under a cloud of suspicion that could no longer be ignored. For the first time, investigators had a witness connecting him directly to Claire Whitfield on the night before she vanished. Inspector Mercer arranged another interview immediately. Carrington appeared at the police station the following morning. Though outwardly calm, he seemed less confident than during their previous conversation. The inspector wasted no time. "You were seen with Claire Whitfield on the evening before her disappearance." Carrington's expression hardened. "I expected that would come up eventually." The response surprised Mercer. "You admit it, of course." The older man sighed. "We argued." The admission immediately attracted attention. "What about?" Carrington hesitated. Then he answered, "The development fund." Miss Marple, who had been invited to observe, remained silent. Carrington continued. "Claire believed money had been stolen, and had it." Mercer asked. The parish chairman looked away. "I honestly didn't know." The answer sounded sincere, at least partly sincere. According to Carrington, Claire had discovered discrepancies in several financial reports and intended to expose them publicly. He claimed he urged caution. She accused him of protecting those responsible. The conversation became heated. Afterward, they went their separate ways. At least, that was his account. Unfortunately for Carrington, it raised as many questions as it answered. If Claire trusted him enough to discuss her discoveries, why had he concealed the meeting for 20 years? When asked directly, he offered a simple explanation: because people assumed she left voluntarily. The answer failed to satisfy anyone. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining the documents found in Harold Briggs's hidden compartment. One notebook proved particularly interesting. The entries spanned several years and appeared to record Harold's private concerns regarding the development fund. At first, the notes focused on accounting discrepancies. Later, entries became increasingly alarming. One passage stood out. "Claire was right. We should have spoken sooner." The statement deeply interested Miss Marple. It suggested Harold eventually concluded that Claire's suspicions had been justified. More importantly, it implied he carried guilt about remaining silent. The following afternoon brought another significant development. Anna Whitfield requested a private meeting with Miss Marple. The two women sat together in Eleanor Finch's garden while autumn leaves drifted across the lawn. Anna appeared troubled. "There is something I haven't told the police," she admitted. Miss Marple waited patiently. "My mother left me a letter." The revelation immediately captured her attention. "A letter?" Anna nodded. "It arrived after her disappearance." "Why keep it secret?" "Because I wasn't sure it mattered." She removed a folded piece of paper from her handbag. The letter was brief. Most of it contained personal remarks. One sentence stood apart from the rest. "If anything happens to me, Remember that the person everyone trusts is the one you should fear. Miss Marple read the line twice, then a third time. The wording was simple, yet it carried enormous significance. Claire Whitfield clearly believed she was in danger. More importantly, she suspected someone respected within the community. That description could apply to several people: Harold Briggs, Edward Carrington, others involved with the project. Still, the warning felt important, very important. Later that evening, Inspector Mercer received unexpected news from the forensic laboratory. The final medical report concerning Harold Briggs had been completed. The findings stunned everyone. Harold had not died of natural causes. He had been poisoned. The substance used was difficult to detect and produced symptoms resembling sudden heart failure. The discovery transformed the case. Overnight, Harold Briggs was officially a murder victim, which meant someone had silenced him before he could provide Anna Whitfield with proof. The implications were chilling. A person connected to events 20 years earlier was apparently still willing to kill. The following morning, police obtained a warrant to search several properties connected to the investigation. Among them was Edward Carrington's home. The search produced nothing obviously incriminating. No hidden documents. No financial records. No evidence linking him directly to murder. Yet one item attracted attention. Inside an old desk drawer lay a photograph. The image showed members of the development committee gathered at a village celebration. On the back, someone had written a short note. Most names were listed beneath the faces. One name had been crossed out heavily in black ink: Claire Whitfield. Inspector Mercer stared at the photograph. The act itself meant little, yet it felt strangely personal, almost emotional. As evening settled over Stoneycroft, Miss Marple reflected upon the growing evidence. Claire Whitfield uncovered a secret. Harold Briggs eventually learned the truth. Both became dangerous to someone, yet despite mounting suspicion, something continued to trouble her. Edward Carrington might be hiding information. He might even have lied repeatedly, but she was not yet convinced he was a killer. And whenever Miss Marple experienced such uncertainty, she trusted it, because human nature, more often than not, revealed truths that evidence alone could not. Somewhere in Stoneycroft, another piece of the puzzle remained hidden, and until it emerged, the real story was still incomplete. The confirmation that Harold Briggs had been poisoned sent a wave of fear through Stoneycroft. For years, Claire Whitfield's disappearance had been viewed as an old mystery. Now, it was tied directly to a modern murder. No one could pretend the danger belonged to the past. Inspector Mercer increased police presence throughout the village. Several key witnesses were advised to remain cautious. Among them was Anna Whitfield. The journalist accepted the warning with surprising calm. She had spent years investigating her mother's fate and seemed prepared for the possibility that someone might try to stop her. What concerned Mercer more was the realization that the killer appeared willing to act whenever old secrets resurfaced. That suggested desperation, and desperate people often made mistakes. Meanwhile, Miss Marple continued studying the relationships among those connected to the development fund. One fact increasingly troubled her: everyone focused on financial fraud. Yet Claire Whitfield's warning to her daughter had not mentioned stolen money. It mentioned trust. The distinction felt important. People did not usually describe dishonest accountants as individuals everyone trusts. The phrase suggested someone admired it, someone respected, someone whose reputation provided protection. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Agnes Morton once again. The retired schoolteacher possessed an excellent memory for village affairs. During their conversation, another forgotten detail emerged. Claire used to visit Margaret Ashcombe quite often, Agnes remarked. Miss Marple looked up immediately. Margaret Ashcombe's funeral had begun the entire mystery. Frequently. Oh yes, Agnes nodded. Margaret was very fond of her. The information was unexpected. Until now, Margaret Ashcombe had seemed unrelated to the investigation. A deceased elderly villager whose funeral happened to feature the mysterious photograph. Suddenly, she appeared connected after all. Miss Marple decided to learn more. Later that evening, she visited Margaret's niece, who had recently inherited several boxes of personal belongings. Among old letters and family photographs lay a small diary. Most entries concerned ordinary village matters, gardening, church events, visits from neighbors. Then Miss Marple discovered references to Claire Whitfield. Several entries described long conversations between the two women. One passage particularly attracted attention. Claire says she finally understands what happened to Robert. The sentence puzzled her. Who was Robert? Further searching provided the answer. Robert Ashcombe had been Margaret's son. According to additional entries, he died 21 years earlier in what was officially described as an accident. Miss Marple frowned thoughtfully. The timing felt significant, very significant. The next morning, Inspector Mercer began reviewing records relating to Robert Ashcombe's death. At first glance, the case appeared straightforward, a fall from a construction scaffold. Witnesses confirmed the accident. No investigation followed, yet one detail immediately stood out. Robert Ashcombe had been employed on the very development project now at the center of the mystery. The discovery introduced an entirely new possibility. What if the story was never solely about missing money? What if something else had occurred during the project? Something worth concealing. Meanwhile, Anna Whitfield made an important breakthrough of her own. While reviewing her mother's surviving papers, she discovered a notebook she had previously overlooked. Most pages contained research notes and observations. Near the back appeared a list of names: Harold Briggs, Edward Carrington, Margaret Ashcombe, Robert Ashcombe. Beside Robert's name, Claire had written two words: not accidental. The phrase sent chills through the investigation team. If Claire believed Robert's death had been murder, then the entire timeline changed. Suddenly, the first victim might not have been Claire. It might have been Robert Ashcombe more than 20 years earlier. That evening, Inspector Mercer gathered with Miss Marple and Anna Whitfield to discuss the new evidence. The atmosphere was tense. Too many pieces were beginning to fit together. Robert Ashcombe died during the development project. Claire investigated years later. Harold Briggs eventually learned the truth. Both suffered consequences. Yet, one question remained. What exactly had Robert discovered? Miss Marple listened quietly as the others debated possibilities. Then she remembered something from Margaret Ashcombe's diary, a brief remark she had nearly overlooked. She retrieved her notes and read the sentence again. Robert said they changed the figures after the meeting. Silence filled the room. Mercer leaned forward. Change what figures? Miss Marple closed the notebook gently. I don't think we're discussing financial records anymore. The realization settled heavily over everyone present. For weeks, investigators had assumed the altered figures involved money. Now, another explanation emerged. Perhaps the figures referred to safety reports, construction records, inspection documents. If so, Robert Ashcombe may have discovered negligence severe enough to cause deaths. And if someone had concealed that negligence, they would possess a motive far more powerful than simple theft. As darkness settled over Stoneycroft, Miss Marple felt the mystery shifting. Once again, the truth was closer than ever, but it was also far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Because if Robert Ashcombe had been murdered to protect a secret, then the killer's first crime occurred more than 20 years ago, and everything that followed might have been an effort to ensure that secret never came to light. The possibility that Robert Ashcombe's death had been the true beginning of the mystery changed everything. Until now, investigators had focused primarily on Claire Whitfield's disappearance and Harold Briggs's poisoning. Suddenly, events stretching back more than 2 decades demanded fresh examination. Inspector Mercer reopened Robert's case immediately. Old files were retrieved from archives. Witness statements were reviewed. Construction records were examined. Most documents appeared ordinary, Yet the deeper investigators looked, the more troubling details emerged. The development project had not been as successful as villagers remembered. Several safety concerns had been raised during construction. Inspection reports contained inconsistencies. Certain figures had indeed been altered, not financial figures, safety measurements. The discovery stunned everyone involved. According to original drafts, recovered from county archives, portions of the site had failed required standards, yet final reports showed those same areas receiving approval. Somebody had changed the numbers, and shortly afterward, Robert Ashcombe died in what was officially ruled an accident. That afternoon, Miss Marple and Inspector Mercer interviewed a retired engineer named Thomas Reed, who had briefly worked on the project. At first, his memory seemed vague. Then Robert Ashcombe's name was mentioned. Everything changed. "I remember Robert," Reed said quietly. He wasn't happy. "About what?" Mercer asked. "The reports," the engineer frowned. He believed someone had falsified inspection results. The statement immediately captured everyone's attention. Did he identify who? Reed hesitated. No, but he was certain the records were wrong. The retired engineer then revealed something even more significant. A heated argument had occurred shortly before Robert's death. Several committee members were present. Among them were Harold Briggs and Edward Carrington. The information strengthened existing suspicions, yet Miss Marple continued to feel that something remained hidden beneath the surface. That evening, Anna Whitfield received an unexpected visitor. The caller was Samuel Hurst, the retired groundskeeper who had seen Claire Whitfield with Edward Carrington years earlier. He appeared nervous, almost frightened. "I should have spoken sooner," he admitted. Anna invited him inside. Over tea he revealed a secret he had carried for 2 decades. On the night Claire disappeared, he witnessed another meeting after her argument with Carrington. A second person had arrived. "Who?" Anna asked. Samuel swallowed hard. "Harold Briggs." The revelation stunned her. Until now, Harold had largely been viewed as a victim who eventually regretted his silence. Samuel's account suggested a more complicated role. According to the groundskeeper, the discussion became heated. Voices were raised. Claire appeared angry. Then the group moved toward the old quarry. After that, Samuel saw nothing more. The information was immediately passed to Inspector Mercer. The significance was enormous. For the first time, Harold Briggs was directly connected to Claire's final known movements. The next morning brought another breakthrough. Police, searching abandoned storage facilities connected to the development project, discovered a metal filing cabinet overlooked for years. Most of the contents were damaged. One folder survived. Inside were handwritten notes from Robert Ashcombe. The pages were incomplete but explosive. Robert described pressure being applied to approve unsafe construction work. He repeatedly mentioned concerns about falsified inspection reports. Most importantly, he identified the individual responsible. Not Edward Carrington, not Harold Briggs. A different name appeared throughout the notes. Peter Langley, the former project manager. The discovery shocked investigators. Peter Langley had received almost no attention during the case. He left Stonycroft shortly after the development project concluded and had rarely been discussed since. Yet Robert's writings placed him at the center of the original scandal. Further inquiries revealed another startling fact. Langley had died 15 years earlier. At first glance, that seemed to eliminate him as a suspect. Then Miss Marple noticed something curious. Nearly every person connected to the mystery remained focused on Langley's actions. No one discussed who benefited afterward. The observation lingered in her thoughts. That afternoon, she reviewed witness statements once again. A familiar pattern emerged. Whenever Peter Langley's name appeared, another individual was usually nearby. Harold Briggs. The connection repeated itself again and again. Construction meetings, committee discussions, safety reviews. Harold seemed present at every crucial moment. Miss Marple sat quietly for several minutes. Then, another realization followed. Harold Briggs had spent years appearing helpful, cooperative, trustworthy, exactly the sort of person villagers instinctively believed. Slowly, she recalled Claire Whitfield's warning. The person everyone trusts is the one you should fear. The words suddenly felt far less abstract. For weeks, investigators had focused on the living suspects: Edward Carrington, Anna's mysterious visitor, various committee members. Yet Claire's warning pointed somewhere else entirely, toward a person whose reputation concealed uncomfortable truths. As E.T. or T. Wendoley, us. Evening settled over Stoneycroft. Miss Marple found herself reconsidering everything she believed about Harold Briggs. The dead hardware shop owner might not have been merely another victim. He might have been hiding something for years, something so dangerous that even after his death, people were still dying because of it. And if that suspicion proved correct, the identity of the killer might be far more surprising than anyone expected. Miss Marple's growing doubts about Harold Briggs forced the investigation in an entirely new direction. For weeks, everyone had treated him as a victim whose conscience finally compelled him to speak. Yet the evidence increasingly suggested a more complicated truth. Harold might have known far more than he ever admitted, perhaps far more than anyone realized. Inspector Mercer initially resisted the idea. After all, Harold had died. Dead men often attracted sympathy. It was easier to view them as innocent than to question their role in events. Nevertheless, the facts demanded examination. The following morning, investigators began reviewing Harold's activities during the years immediately following Robert Ashcombe's death. What they discovered proved illuminating. Harold's financial circumstances changed dramatically during that period. Nothing overtly suspicious, no sudden fortune. Yet several investments appeared unusually successful. Property purchases generated unexpected profits. Business opportunities seemed to arrive at precisely the right moments. Individually, the details meant little. Collectively, they raised questions. Meanwhile, Miss Marple continued studying Claire Whitfield's notebook. One page in particular attracted her attention. Near the margin beside Harold's name, Claire had written a single sentence: "Knows what happened but isn't the one I'm afraid of." The observation fascinated Miss Marple. Claire clearly distinguished between knowledge and responsibility. Harold knew the truth. Someone else inspired fear. The distinction felt critically important. That afternoon, another witness emerged unexpectedly. A retired solicitor named Benjamin Clark contacted Inspector Mercer after hearing reports about the reopened investigation. His memory concerned a meeting that occurred shortly after Robert Ashcombe's death. According to Clark, several committee members gathered privately to discuss potential legal consequences arising from the construction accident. Most attendees expressed concern. One individual appeared particularly determined to control the narrative. Edward Carrington? No. Harold Briggs? No. The name surprised everyone. Margaret Ashcombe. The revelation stunned investigators. Margaret had been viewed throughout the case as a grieving mother and little more. Now, a new possibility emerged. Perhaps she possessed knowledge others lacked. Clark explained further. Margaret insisted her son's death was no accident. She demanded answers. Several committee members attempted to calm her. Others encouraged silence. The meeting ended without resolution. Yet Clark never forgot Margaret's certainty. She believed someone was lying, he recalled. The statement resonated deeply with Miss Marple, because, if Margaret suspected foul play 21 years earlier, it explained her later friendship with Claire Whitfield. Both women may have been searching for the same truth. The next breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source. While cataloguing Margaret Ashcombe's personal effects, her niece discovered a sealed envelope hidden inside an old sewing box. The envelope was addressed simply to whoever finally asks the right questions. Inspector Mercer opened it carefully. Inside lay several handwritten pages. The contents transformed the investigation. Margaret described a conversation with Robert shortly before his death. According to her account, Robert discovered that safety reports had been altered to conceal structural problems at the development site. More importantly, he identified the person responsible. Margaret wrote the name clearly: not Peter Langley, not Harold Briggs, not Edward Carrington. The name was Eleanor Finch, Miss Marple's cousin. The room fell silent. Mercer read the passage twice. Then again, the implication seemed impossible. Eleanor Finch had lived quietly in Stonycroft for decades. She was respected, kind, trusted, exactly the sort of person no one would suspect. Miss Marple felt a chill, not because she immediately believed the accusation, because she suddenly understood Claire's warning: the person everyone trusts. The phrase echoed in her thoughts. Investigators quickly examined Eleanor's historical connection to the development project. To their astonishment, she had indeed served as administrative secretary during construction. Her responsibilities included maintaining reports and handling documentation, precisely the sort of position that would provide access to altered records. Yet another detail complicates matters. Eleanor had never been mentioned prominently throughout the investigation, not because she concealed her role, because nobody thought to ask. The realization was deeply unsettling. That evening, Miss Marple returned home to find Eleanor waiting in the sitting room. Her cousin appeared calm, almost too calm. The older woman looked up as Miss Marple entered. "I suppose they've discovered Margaret's letter," Eleanor said quietly. Miss Marple stopped. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Eleanor sighed heavily. It was always going to happen eventually. The statement hung in the air. Not a denial, not an explanation. Something in between. Miss Marple sat down slowly. Outside, twilight settled over Stonycroft. Inside, she felt the entire mystery shifting once again. For the first time since the investigation began, the truth seemed painfully close. Yet instinct warned her against rushing toward conclusions. Human nature was rarely straightforward. Appearances could deceive. And while Eleanor Finch clearly knew something significant, Miss Marple remained unconvinced that the final answer had been revealed. Still, one fact was undeniable. The conversation awaiting them would determine everything. And before another day ended, the secret hidden for more than 20 years would finally come into the open. Miss Marple and Eleanor Finch sat facing one another in the quiet sitting room. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The ticking of the mantel clock seemed unusually loud. Finally, Eleanor folded her hands and sighed. "I suppose it looks dreadful." Miss Marple regarded her calmly. "It certainly raises questions." Eleanor nodded. "Then I shall answer them." What followed surprised Miss Marple. Eleanor admitted she had handled administrative records for the development project more than 20 years earlier. She had indeed discovered irregularities in several reports. However, she insisted she was not responsible for altering them. Instead, she had been instructed to file revised documents that had already been changed. By whom? Miss Marple asked quietly. Eleanor looked toward the window. Peter Langley. The name was not unexpected, yet Eleanor continued. Peter oversaw the project, but he wasn't acting alone. Miss Marple remained silent. Harold Briggs knew exactly what was happening. The statement landed heavily. Eleanor explained that Robert Ashcombe discovered safety reports had been falsified to conceal serious structural defects. Peter Langley feared the project would collapse financially if construction stopped. Harold Briggs supported the cover-up. Both men believed the problems could be managed without public disclosure. Robert disagreed. He threatened to expose everything. Days later he died. Eleanor insisted she never learned exactly what happened, but she always suspected Robert's fall had not been accidental. Fear kept her silent. The years passed, life continued, yet the secret never disappeared. Then Claire Whitfield arrived. While reviewing archived records, she uncovered evidence that pointed toward the original falsifications. She began asking questions. dangerous questions. Harold Briggs panicked, Peter Langley panicked, and shortly afterward, Claire vanished. By dawn the following morning, Inspector Mercer had verified much of Eleanor's account. More importantly, investigators uncovered new information from Peter Langley's surviving estate records. Among old correspondence was a series of letters exchanged between Langley and Harold Briggs. The contents were devastating. The letters revealed that Harold had known about the altered safety reports from the beginning. Even worse, one letter referenced a confrontation with Robert Ashcombe shortly before his death. The wording stopped short of a confession, yet it strongly implied direct involvement. The truth was finally emerging, but one crucial question remained. If Harold Briggs helped conceal Robert's death and Claire Whitfield's disappearance, who poisoned Harold 20 years later? The answer arrived unexpectedly. Anna Whitfield provided it. While reviewing material recovered from her mother's belongings, she discovered a recording Claire had made shortly before disappearing. The tape was damaged, but usable. When investigators listened, they heard Claire describing her findings. She is named Peter Langley. She was named Harold Briggs, and then she mentioned someone else, a witness, someone who had seen Robert Ashcombe arguing with Harold shortly before the fatal incident. That witness was Margaret Ashcombe. Suddenly, everything became clear. Margaret had known the truth for years. She had never possessed enough proof to act, but she understood who was responsible. More importantly, she shared her suspicions with one person she trusted completely, her niece, Judith Ashcombe. Judith had inherited Margaret's papers after her death. When Harold Briggs learned that Margaret's belongings might contain evidence, he arranged a meeting with Judith. Anna Whitfield had unknowingly accelerated events by returning to the village and reopening old wounds. Harold desperately wanted to recover any documents before they reached the police. Instead, Judith confronted him. The confrontation turned violent. Harold collapsed after suffering a reaction to poison placed in his tea. Judith later admitted what happened. She had not planned a murder months in advance. She acted in anger after learning Harold's role in Robert's death and Claire's disappearance. The case shocked the village. For decades, the wrong people had been trusted. The truth had remained buried beneath reputation, fear, and silence. In the weeks that followed, official findings confirmed that Harold Briggs and Peter Langley had concealed dangerous defects in the development project. Robert Ashcombe died after confronting them. Claire Whitfield disappeared while pursuing the truth. Several others remained silent out of fear, allowing the deception to survive for years. One quiet evening, Miss Marple sat with Anna Whitfield in the churchyard where the mystery had begun. The funeral photograph had been framed and preserved as evidence. Anna studied it thoughtfully. "My mother spent years searching for the truth," Miss Marple nodded, "and because of her it was eventually found." Anna looked toward the fading sunlight beyond the gravestones. "It seems strange that a photograph solved everything." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Not the photograph, my dear. No, it merely reminded people to look." The church bells rang softly across Stonycroft. At last, the secrets of the past had been uncovered. The village would heal, as villages always did. But Miss Marple knew a lesson remained. People often fear strangers because they are unfamiliar. Yet, the greatest dangers frequently come from those everyone believes they already know. And sometimes, all it takes is a single face in a forgotten photograph to reveal the truth.